Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balcerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. My guest today has over 3 decades of experience in the cybersecurity industry. He's a privacy strategist, data governance expert, and AI risk management leader. Currently a managing principal of data security and privacy, Andy Soodek. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ward. Appreciate it.
So glad you're able to join me this bright, shiny morning. So, Andy, in your professional opinion, what's the biggest challenge organizations are facing with regard to data security?
Honestly, I think it's the balance between meeting business objectives. There's a reason that everybody collects all the data that they do, and keeping it protected. There's so much data sprawl all over everywhere. And it's a challenge to keep all that data safe when it's getting legitimately shared for authorized purposes. And it's tough to control what your third parties and business partners are doing. And even internally, you've got stakeholders with legitimate business cases for processing data like they do. But keeping control of that is a tough spot to be in, particularly when that same data gets replicated over and over again and creates new metadata, and determining what the authoritative data sources are. All of that combined is, I think, the biggest challenge today.
I mean, I heard lots of pain points in that statement, and definitely agree with everything you said. So I'm curious. I mean, you've been around, you've been in the industry for a while. What are your thoughts on how folks can solve for it? Because my opinion, and the opinion of others I've spoken to, is it's only sort of kind of getting worse, right? AI proliferation is making exposure and data creation and data duplication, really happen at hyper speed. Yeah, it's getting crazy. So what should folks do?
Well, the first thing we do is really try and we really depend a lot on getting consent from consumers to use their data. You got to be super transparent about what it is you're going to do with the data that's noticed, and then you got to get consent to use the data. Even when that happens, again, it's still difficult when you're sharing that data with other parties who are doing different things with it. You just don't want to be the ones caught with your pants down, right? So our data is everywhere, right? The idea that a social security number, I recognize that it's non-personal information, non-public information, but the fact of the matter is my social security number is all over everywhere. I am constantly getting contacted by people who want to give me loans for a business that I haven't been involved in for 10 years. The ability to combine data that we've got internally as an organization with data broker data, because we've gone out and sweetened that data, really just is rife for misuse, for mispurpose. And I get that people have legitimate reasons to collect that data and process that data. But boy, now with AI, that adds new layer of complexity to it, right? Where, you got one agent that is processing data for one purpose. Maybe it's in a training phase and outputs some data, and some other agent then goes and picks it up and misuses that for some other purpose. And suddenly you've got, distorted data that can reveal bias, result in discrimination. These are all the challenges of the day. What we're seeing companies do is try and identify where all that data resides right now, and B, we're helping companies to deploy knowledge graphs, to apply semantic layering, clean up the data, determine authoritative data sources that then can be used in AI models and for various processing purposes. It's a continuous loop, though, right? It doesn't ever end. So even though you've got a clean data set that's going into a model or some data processing, the outputs of that then, may be not as clean. It's got to go through that continuous loop where you're rerunning that through the knowledge graph, determining what outputs are correct, what needs to be translated, put into a clean data set for reprocessing.
Yeah, 100%. I like something you said right there, the continuous loop. I myself, a few times in my career, my leaders have come to me and say, "Hey, Ward, when are we done with that project, that initiative, whatever it ends up being?" And I've always laughed and said, "Never."
Yeah, right.
And if it's in person or a video meeting, I always get a weird look, right, raised eyebrow or something else, because they don't like that answer, right?
Yeah.
Folks don't like that answer that it's never done, and it's true. The organizations that, with everything that you just said, right, that go through that loop and call mission complete and then move on, right, set it on a shelf, move on with their day. Congratulations. Like, you did the good in the moment. And now, what are you going to do? I would say 6 months from now, but like even now these days, like, what are you going to do a week from now when it's all a mess again?
I mean, it's never ending loop, right? A never ending governance cycle too. And not only that, the governance cycle needs to evolve, right? You got to keep up with what the latest and greatest thought process is, what the newest challenges are, because the next challenge is right around the corner, right? So, boy, I go back to times where I ran my own data center. Everything was sort of controlled right within an on-premise environment, and we were just trying to keep on top of that. And then cloud comes along, and now that data is distributed further. AI comes along. It's never ending. You got to just keep up with what you've got going on now, because, as I said, the next challenge is on its way.
Absolutely.
And education of your business stakeholders is super important. They need to understand what the potential risks are, what the real risks are, and they need to continuously get educated on what the latest and greatest thinking is in business terms, so that they're protecting the data as much as possible. And that's a challenge.
Unfortunately, it's becoming an industry phrase, right? That users are the weakest link, which, there's plenty of argument. No, that's not true, but education is still paramount for everybody, both the defenders, both the business folks, everybody involved, because, to the point you made a few times now, the landscape is changing at hyperspeed. Funny that you're reminiscing a little bit, right, of the data center. I too started my career when data centers were the thing, right? That's where all your data was. It was the whole castle methodology, right? We're going to firm up the walls. We're going to have all the protections, moat and all that good stuff. And when cloud kind of came out, I remember thinking to myself, who the heck is going to do that, right? Who is going to put their, and I wasn't even thinking compute at the time. I was thinking data, right? Who the heck's going to put their data into basically somebody else's data center? And then it just exploded, right? Basically overnight.
Yeah, at the time, I was working as for a federal contracting firm, and boy, the federal government wouldn't let us put anything in the cloud. I mean, it all had to be locked down, right? And man, that changed fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, DisaCloud came out, right? They figured out what's the appropriate way for doing all that. And you are correct. I mean, I too was in government contracting for a while, and when I first joined, it's like, oh, here we go. We're back to on-prem only. We're good.
Hmm.
But similar to what you were just saying, like I was there when the shift started, and then boom, it was there, and it was almost cloud first in a way, at least as cloud first as the federal government could be back then. Um, it was a strange time to be in that space, at least the space I was in when I was there.
It was a strange time for us too, and not only for that reason. Boy, when I was doing that work, it predated the NIST cybersecurity framework. So I should say I'm a frameworks nerd, and really I'm a GRC guy, more so than a technical. I've always been fortunate to work with really strong technical people who could enact the controls. But the prior to NIST cybersecurity framework, we were doing everything just by NIST 853 and the control families. Man, it was hundreds of pages of documentation that we had to put together every year. That thinking evolved really rapidly over the course of about 5 years. Fortunately for the folks who are sort of still in that racket. Yeah, but CMMC came along, and we were advising companies to get up to compliance with CMMC, and things involved. That's for sure. And I will imagine they will continue to as well. I would expect it.
So Andy, going back to your answer of the biggest problem, balance of receiving data, creating data, and keeping it protected. Kind of your first step that you outlined was getting consent, right, to get that data, to use the data, and then you went into understanding where that data is right now, and you further said that it can be duplicated and moved around, and certainly probably everybody listening, that's where all the organizations are at, right? Data's everywhere. Understanding the duplication, all that is kind of nuts when you start digging into it. So Andy, um, in that step, what are your tips and tricks for any organizations that are trying to kind of understand what that looks like?
First thing is you really need to understand where all those data collection points are. And they're coming in lots of different ways, right? So I work primarily in financial services, right? And I think this is the case for most organizations, regardless of sector. Um, you've got data that's coming in via web formats. So um, uh, pe- people are interfacing with your website. They're interfacing with your social media sites. You've got customer care representatives who are collecting data. Um, they are the data that they are collecting isn't always the same as what somebody might enter into a website. Then that data is getting used for production purposes, transaction processing. So it's in those systems. Then some cool data scientist will take that data and process it in some sort of an analytics platform, whether it's a data lake, a data warehouse. So it's residing there. That gets output to shared drives. You've got unstructured data that's sitting all over everywhere, which may conflict with your structured data. So it's all over, and that's one of the problems that we're getting asked to solve with a lot of our clients is how do we control that data sprawl? How do we know which data we can trust? And so that's why we're coming in and helping advise on strategies to help sort of sort that data out, clean it. But then that needs to get put into some sort of centralized repository. So again, there's another copy of it. And hopefully that becomes the authoritative data source, but it's still got to get distributed out to all those systems that are processing, right? So, um, uh, again, knowledge graph is the latest and greatest. Um, the way for us to solve and clean up that data. But, there's also something to be said for good old fashioned data retention and data deletion processes, which we typically see companies just don't do as well as they would like to, right? You've got regulatory obligations to delete data at the end of its useful life. We see more times than not, most organizations have more data than they should, which creates legal liability for them as well, right?
I think, probably 95%, and, all percentages are made up, right? When you come up with them on the fly, but most of the organizations I talk to when we're talking data security as a whole, I tend to ask about data retention. I always get the laugh back. It's usually, yes, we have a policy. Yes, that policy is updated on a regular basis, usually annually. Yes, majority of folks know about it, but no, it's not actually being followed.
Yeah,
They
right.
have data retention for 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it is. That's their policy, but survey says they've actually got, 20, 30 plus years of data sitting around.
Yeah, this is a struggle for everybody, and I think everybody thinks the business folks think it's better to retain that data because I don't know, they think they might face some sort of an audit or some sort of a regulatory finding or need it for some legal protection, and there are those rare cases where that happens, but for the most part, it's less than you would think, right? Less than they would think, I should say.
Yeah, I think a lot of this goes back to, really the third point you had made, which was the continuous loop of governance, right? Good old governance that I think a lot of organizations, I don't want to say ignore, because most organizations do have a GRC group, and
Mhm.
that GRC group is incredibly busy, but more often than not, I've seen a general lack of data governance, right? They've got great GRC processes around third party risk and internal security controls and yada, yada, yada. But when it comes to data risk and data governance, it's either not there or not followed uniformly. So again, going back to yourself, Andy, you've been doing this for a while. When you start working with an organization on setting some of those initial frameworks or guardrails, what are the first couple things that you look to enable there?
I actually think that, at least it's been my experience in the last few years, that most organizations do have some form of data governance in place, and in fact, the organizations we come into or that we encounter are looking for some sort of tactical approach to address the holes that they have already identified that they've got. Data retention is one of those areas. Um, Data classification, they may be overclassifying the data, and it's creating so much overhead that they really need to figure out how to simplify that so that it makes more sense for the business because the business is evolving. Um, you know, Growth through merger and acquisition creates all kinds of agita because this organization was doing it one way, the other organization was doing it another, and they need some way to cohesively put all that together to make a logical sense and anticipate for additional changes that are coming. Um, and then, putting in the data protection controls around all of that to make sure that they are meeting their regulatory obligations as closely as possible. And then I always try to uh, um, get them to think about the customer and what they're going to do to make that customer trust them, to engender loyalty and stickiness. So I'm looking at it from a privacy perspective or privacy lens because, well, I mean, I'm sort of a hardcore privacy wonk, if you will. Again, it's a matter of playing catch up or at least trying to stay caught up. Uh, and so, it's really about maturing the data governance capability. And I do think that part of that is, yes, you put in a data governance program. And as we discussed earlier, uh, it's not a one and done. It's making sure that that's a continuous repetitive loop. And that's part of, developing an operating model for a business to make sure that that continues to go on and on and on. Now, increasingly, we're adding in the AI governance layer, making sure that you're, preparing that data, making sure that you're monitoring the business case for an AI use case, make sure you're monitoring the design and development, and then the outputs and the adequate training, testing, validation of the model. That all has to become part of the data governance and enterprise risk management framework.
I want to go back. You said something very, very interesting. And this actually came up in another episode too. So I want to go back to it. You said over classifying data. And the reason I want to go back to it, it's interesting. Also in my career, data classification has been one of those initiatives that's been tough, right? And I don't think its difficulty has gotten any less over the years. Certainly not from a tooling perspective, but just in general. A lot of organizations have a data classification schema, right? So they've done the good on getting that sorted. They might have some sort of mapping of data types, data elements to that classification. But there's often the struggle on, okay, great, we have these things. Now what do we do next? It's kind of struggle number one that I've seen, but also struggle number two. And a conversation I had very recently actually was going against what you said on overclassification. I had a client that wanted to do that. They felt having more classifications would make it easier to be hyper focused on certain controls for certain classifications, right? They felt the standard 3-tier or 4-tier system was not sufficient. So going back to you, Andy, first I agree, right? Overclassifying is bad, but I'm curious on, let's dig into that more. What do you mean? What have you seen? And how can folks get out of that situation if they're there?
They're just putting in too many layers where, and there are too many granular rules within each classification set that result in role-based access controls being inconsistently followed across different business groups. When it gets to be too overclassified, you end up with, some people who are maybe at different levels and have different needs for that data, getting unequal access to that data. Some people should legitimately get access to the data that don't have that capability, that are barred from using the data, and their peers, have too much access to the data. And it's because of those granular rules. It also makes it difficult for sort of the executive level to be able to make those decisions around who should be able to do what with the data, where should we be able to share that data or not. And so simplifying that, and I think it gets down to that sort of 4-tier level. I've heard the white, red, green, yellow. I thought that was a real strong approach where, you're specifically defining what people can do with the data, who they can share it with. And what we're trying to do is just help organizations to, again, simplify that so that it's real clear, it's real explainable what you're doing with the data. You can be really transparent around the data use, and it's trainable internally, and it's also explainable externally.
I like that. I like that. I mean, trainable internally, hallelujah, right? Because if your users don't either know how to classify or use data that is classified or understand, data sensitivity awareness, essentially, you failed, right? Number one, right? Why the heck are you doing it if people can't actually understand and use it? But certainly from an audit perspective, because I mean, I always enjoyed auditors coming in, not really. If you can't easily explain it to an auditor on here's how we meet this, here's how we do this, then again, you've failed, right? What you built has not been successful.
Fair.
So you teased out AI governance as another facet, and certainly, my opinion, there's a lot of data stuff that goes in the right data security, data governance. There's a lot of overlap, right? If it's a Venn diagram, those circles are definitely overlapping quite a bit. So, um, from an AI governance perspective, is there anything else that folks should be thinking about that we haven't discussed already?
I think a big point with AI governance is this notion of inference and prediction, right? So it's not just that you're processing the data because, well, we're not, right? Machines are. And they're making inferences about people, maybe based on legitimate rules, but there's a lot of probability in there that can again distort or show bias, result in discrimination. I know
Mhm.
I've said that already before, but those things are very important to somebody who is associated with privacy. We've been helping organizations get ready for, they're in the United States, unfortunately. Well, sorry, that the EU has a lot more tolerance for regulation, and the EU AI Act has done, I mean, it's a pretty solid framework for, um, uh, governing risk, but based on risk of the AI models. We've been doing a lot of work with organizations, helping them prepare for the California ADMT regulation, which really is the first AI governance regulation that is really going into effect in the U.S. So that's really concerned with automated decision making technology, right? So it where a machine is making a decision about a person that can impact a person's, well-being, whether they can get a loan, whether they qualify for, a bank account, whether decisions about medical health, diagnoses, whether they can get housing. Um, and particularly without human in the loop controls, where a human
Mm.
conducts some sort of a review of the decision, uh, and, and that decision then gets made without that human in the loop. So what we've been doing is helping organizations kind of plot out what they should do to prepare for this regulation, what controls they should put in place. Honestly, um, whether or not first of all, they do need to disclose that they are using these automated decision-making technologies, and they need to give consumers the right to opt out, or they need to be able to explain on the back end um, what decision was made, how that decision was made. It's basically a right to appeal, right? Doesn't only cover AI, it also covers legacy processing too. So in the banking and credit space, you know, for 30 years, the credit decisioning has been, an automated process, right? So if a consumer is denied an ability for a credit card, they're not going to undo 30 years of legacy processing to, suddenly review everybody's application for a credit card, right? But they need to be able to explain how they came to that decision.
Right.
And there's a lot of, automated review of a person's credit history against the three major credit bureaus and data brokers, and there's a lot of modeling and there's a lot of logic that's gone into that. So, we've been helping them. So a lot of organizations will say, hey, you take up your credit bureau, and what California asks you to do is to add this additional layer on top of it, which is okay. You don't need to necessarily change that, but you do need to add on the layer that says, here's how we came to that decision, right? Not at the super incremental detail, but you need to be able to explain the logic that says this is what we did with your data to get to the decision, and give the right for an appeal. And so what organizations have to do is actually add some people in there who have the authority to be able to review the decision and to potentially reverse the decision. That's not going to happen all that often, right? These models are pretty fine tuned.
I would hope so by now.
Yeah. Right.
We've been used for many, many years at this point.
Yes. Yeah. So those are sort of some of the things that we've been working on in the recent, within the last year, let's say.
I like it. And yeah, I mean, yet again, California's trailblazing some of those things, which is great, right? It's great to see some of those controls in. I mean, they did it with CCPA initially. And now we've got many states that have their own versions. And I'm sure
we got 23 states with privacy laws, and they all sort of mirror California with maybe some, minor state specific nuances. Colorado ended up changing its AI law to look a whole lot more like California. That comes into effect sometime in 2027. I expect that we're going to see more of the same, right? On the AI side.
I mean, AI has exploded, right? So now some people love it, some people hate it, but let's be real. Regulations and guidance do need to evolve. It'll never be as quick, right? But
Right.
quicker, right? Try to catch up a little bit to get there.
Well, it's unfortunate we can't get a federal privacy law, and I don't think we're going to see a federal AI protection law anytime in the near future either. So,
agreed. Not until. So my opinion is not until we have a majority, right, of the states that have their own, and then maybe, just maybe, at the federal level, they'll say, oh, hey, maybe we do need something. Or, maybe they'll take the other approach, be like, you know what, the states already have their own thing. Let them keep it that way. And it makes it difficult, right, for the organizations that are defending across states to have to bring out that kind of like that map of what are the differences between this state and this
Right.
state? What do I need to do versus, hey, I know if I do this thing, it's applicable across the board, right, across every state.
We try and get organizations to meet the high bar as much as possible, because we should anticipate as the additional states come on with their privacy laws, it's only going to get tougher. So, go for the high bar, and then that you can comply with all the other states that are coming into play.
Andy, you've been doing this for quite a while. Like the intro was, over 3 decades of time. We talked about you and me right back in the day, data centers, then cloud, now AI. But what's been your journey? How did you get to where you are today in your career?
Sort of a circuitous path, and I actually hear a lot of your guests say a similar thing. I didn't start out as a technician. I actually came up through project and program management, and I've always been interested in regulatory compliance. Even when I was doing my MBA at Georgetown, I ended up taking classes in the School of Foreign Service and law school. Um, I I kept working up through the project and program management spot until all of a sudden I found myself at this federal contractor, and I can see that they had just won this federal contract, and I could see that they didn't have what they needed to comply with all of their NIST obligations, and felt like I could do it. And the next thing you know, they hired me as their CISO. And my job was really, working through all of their regulatory obligations and sort of running the security shop for you know for that organization. I did that for about 5 years, and then we went through a private equity takeover, and suddenly we had two CISOs and two CIOs, um, and I had an opportunity with a technical partner to do some consulting work for a few other organizations. Suddenly, these opportunities fell into my lap, and we ended up leaving and starting an MSSP and security advisory consulting firm. I'm going to give them a little plug: Secure Compliance Solutions. They're still in business today. Uh, really strong people there, good people. Uh, so I did that for a couple of years, and it was right around the time that GDPR was sort of going through its, coming into existence with 2016. At that time, I sort of realized that what I really cared about more than anything was protecting our data. And I wrote a manifesto about why not the GDPR for the U.S. It was just a philosophical document and what I really wanted to accomplish in my life and help organizations accomplish. What I found was that it didn't really have the stomach for sales, and I really wanted to just deliver. I came into an opportunity at a bigger consulting firm, just doing basically privacy consulting. I mean, that's where I wanted to be. So I left Secure Compliance Solutions and started work in that space. I've had all kinds of really great opportunities working with a lot of really great organizations facing a lot of very big challenges. Um, and and I think I've helped a lot of organizations to meet their compliance obligations and again build trust with their customer bases. Um, I've learned a lot along the way, and I think I've helped to teach a whole lot of people about some really practical things that they can do to up level their privacy games. Um, when we first started out, in around 2018, doing this kind of work, we were building whole privacy programs. Since then, we've been helping companies with tactical deployments of controls and systems. Again, a lot of universal consent and preference work because so many companies are dependent on collecting consent from consumers, particularly where the processing is outside of their sort of core business. So, if you're in financial services, you collect non-personal public, non-public information, KYC, AML information that's part and parcel of sort of core processing, transaction processing. But marketing use cases, data analytics use cases, those aren't core processing activities. And for that, you need to collect consent. So we've been helping companies with a lot of that. And as I said, now, increasingly getting into AI governance.
Very, very interesting journey. I'm curious because I've talked to a lot of folks that have made this shift. So you went from the enterprise side, right? You said you were a CISO and a leader there, and then you shifted into consulting essentially. So, I mean, any regrets, or have you been loving the consulting life since
Oh,
then?
yeah, sure. I've got some regrets. And number one, instead of an MBA, I wish I had gotten a law degree, more so than anything. I feel like at this point, I'd be a privacy or data protection officer for a company as opposed to in consulting. Consulting has taught me, it's given me exposure to a lot of different use cases and a lot of different challenges. And I'm 57. I feel like I've got one more big run in me at some point. And honestly, I would like to go back to an industry role at some point.
Amazing. And it's never too late, right?
Not too late.
I'm on LinkedIn far more than I should be, for sure. And
right.
And I keep seeing those stories, right, of folks that have jumped around and they're still grinding, whether it be 37, 47, 57, even 67, right? I've seen some folks in the 60s, make a pivot.
Yeah.
Never too late.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I'm not giving up hope. It's going to happen at some point.
Well, Andy, I really appreciate you joining the show. This has been a great episode, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. I really do.
Absolutely. And big thank you to the audience. Really hope you enjoyed the episode, learned something today. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centro. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte-scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centro.io. Catch you next time.